Joining us now, Greg Rawlins, Fund Manager at Grindrod Asset Management. Greg, let's just start with whether it's REITs or rates, because my co-host has been telling me that it's pretty much like tomato. Which one do we go with for this discussion?
The Americans all call them REITs.
REITs, well, REITs it is for tonight, Wayne. We're going with REITs.
That's easy.
Can we take one step back and get you just to outline what a REIT is? I know we have briefly discussed it before, but this is going to be a game where we're going to put a little bit of education into the fold.
REITs is an acronym for Real Estate Investment Trusts, and it's very similar to our property unit trusts and property loan stocks. However, the REITs, particularly the US REIT model, has got some other characteristics that make it slightly different. And globally, virtually all the markets are moving towards emulating the US REIT model market.
Now look, how far has this got in South Africa, Greg? I mean, how far are these REITs? I know there's been some legislation changes or some pending legislation changes, but where does the SA market sit now?
This change has been in the pipeline for 3 years. Nothing much has happened, and I spoke to some people a couple of weeks ago, and there just seems to be no end in sight as to when it's coming through. It's pretty frustrating, and I honestly don't know what is blocking it at this point in time.
So things are normal then?
Yes, normal by South African standards, yes.
Touching on liquidity problems normally associated with REITs, can you elaborate on that view?
When you enter into the global property market or the global REIT market, you're exposed to REITs that range from $1 billion up to $25 billion.
So there's no liquidity problem?
REITs their market capitalization is about $3 to $4 billion, just to put it into perspective. And at the same time, you have so much choice, so that if a REIT is overvalued or undervalued, there's always so many more other options. It's not a very tight market, as you experience in some of the smaller markets where you find listed property.
I still need to understand, Greg, the value of investing in a REIT. Why would I want to put my money into a REIT?
Well, if you believe in the fundamentals and of property investment, I heard Wayne showing a bit of skepticism earlier on in your program, but it's really a vehicle that overcomes a liquidity problem of owning property directly, in that you can go in and out very quickly. It's a tradable asset, whereas if you're going into direct commercial property, sometimes it's very difficult to even sell it under circumstances like they are now.
Greg, when you look at your two international property funds, you've got the International Property Fund and the International Global Property Income Fund. I mean,
yes.
What's the difference between the two? But maybe before we even get to that, I've just come back from London. I was there about 2 weeks ago, and they're building this huge thing that goes into the clouds in London now. I think it's called the Shard or whatever. It's on the North Bank. Yeah, it's on the South Bank, and also there's quite a few buildings going up in London. And why are the people building these? Is there demand? Is it looking better overseas?
Wayne, this is the benefit and this is of investing in the asset class global property rather than one country's listed property, in that if there's doubts, there's bound to be another country or economic zone that is going up that you can increase your weighting. So to answer your question in broad terms, the UK listed property market doesn't have much appeal to me at the moment, and I have a far larger weighting in Australia and the US purely because there's so much choice there. But the UK doesn't appeal to me at all. And if you're saying that they're building, it just doesn't. It reduces that appeal even more.
Recently, I had a guest on the show who said that one of the biggest contrarian trades you could make at the moment was potentially property in the US. And you speak about your exposure on that front, sitting at some 52% when you look at your country diversification on the Grindrod Global Property Income Fund. Do you see it as a contrarian play?
Bronwyn, the US market has got so many sectors. We South Africans are very used of the three usual suspects of offices, retail, and industrial. And you may recall in my discussion with you 2 weeks ago, we covered student accommodation REITs, and we covered mass data storage REITs. And because you've got so much choice, it increases the possibility of finding other REITs or other sectors that are counter-cyclical, rather counter-cyclical than contrarian. And one of them that you may be interested in is the forestry REIT sector, which is looking promising, and I've increased my exposure to one particular REIT there, Rainier.
And certainly when you say you've increased your exposure, how significant is your exposure to Rainier, that forestry REIT?
Very close to 5%. And the appeal there is that the lumber prices are very low at the moment, and it doesn't take much to increase the prices, albeit coming off a very low base. For instance, the factors that look to increasing the price of lumber is that they've got a pine beetle infestation in Canada, so it's reducing their harvest. It may even reduce it down by 50%. China continues to take off lumber from the US, and a short-term blip could come from Japan when they start rebuilding as a result of the Fukushima disaster. So those could increase the demand, but the real driver is the US housing market, of which there's very little prospect at this point in time. But those three factors that I ran through could keep it going for the next 3 years.
Greg, just before we run out of time, there's another one that we need to talk about, and that is U-Storage, which is a self-storage REIT. A very interesting one that I think we should throw forward to before we close out this interview.
Okay. Well, the self-storage, my analyst in the States tells me that for the last 7 years, or over 7 years, the self-storage sector has been the best performing. And what is happening is that more and more people are using the concept of storage. Rather than having their boat or their jet ski clogging up their driveway, they use self-storage, and then smaller businesses use self-storage as well, rather than having warehouses. But really what's increasing the demand is that as people downsize under the current conditions, they're wanting something to store their personal belongings. And there's significant pressure or demand for self-storage facilities in the States.